As promised, here's my follow-up video on fountain pen inks. Thought I would get that covered, and then I can get back to the normal journal posts that I've had. Since I've started looking into fountain pens, one of the things I determined pretty early on is that I wasn't going to be a cartridge guy. For me, one of the most important parts of the fountain pen hobby was the variety of colors that were available, and you're pretty limited if you're sticking with just nothing but cartridges. Yes, you could empty a cartridge and start refilling the cartridge with these inks, but I kind of wanted to just avoid the cartridge thing. Now, since I started with the Platinum Preppy and it just is pretty much cartridge only, I didn't really have a choice there, but since it wasn't working out for me with how quickly it was drying out in my climate, the next set of pens I bought was specifically workable with converters so that I could just take the plunge, and once I did, I didn't look back. My daughter's also big on plastic waste, and although cartridges are pretty small in plastic waste, I didn't mind reducing that kind of waste by just going with converters that I can refill all the time and never have to worry about tossing. So that's kind of the way I went. Now, I am an old school Dungeons and Dragons player. I started playing in the 80s when it first came out. I was in high school. So as I started browsing JetPen's website, which is where I do most of my purchasing, the first ink that jumped out at me was this Diamine Red Dragon. And probably for nostalgia's sake, I picked that up. But the fact is, now it became one of my go-to inks constantly, to the point that I actually even went out and bought the 80 milliliter bottle, which you can see is almost halfway empty at this point. So definitely the Red Dragon is one of my most used inks in my collection. And that started me off on the Diamine direction, which you'll see here in a little while. I have quite a few of those. Now, in the infancy of my ink gathering, it was all about most bang for your buck. So Diamine has these nice little 30 milliliter bottles that are reasonably priced. So when I was buying pens and other supplies from the website, I would just toss a bottle or two of Diamine ink in so I could hit that free shipping level. And my collection of inks just slowly started growing from there. But there's more than Diamine out there, and again, you know, I'm kind of more on the the low-mid budget expenditure, I think. So another really good option back in those days is this, I don't know how to pronounce it. They had these 3 packs of Shizuku inks. So I picked up several of these 3 packs to just kind of broaden my collection of inks. Honestly, I also did it because, you know, Diamine bottles are plastic, and there is something about just having some glass ones for display. So I picked these up, and you can just listen to that clink of that glass. I just had to have some glass ones on my shelf because I just think they're really pretty that way, and that looks, in my opinion, better than just this plastic Red Dragon Diamine ink bottle. So I had to have a few of these, and they were relatively decent price. It was a good budget, and they allowed me to try out some other inks. When you sit in this hobby for a while, you get to this point where you have enough inks that you start considering swatching so that you can always remember the colors that were what the color looks like on paper. So I started looking into that, and they had these color space swatch items that I thought were really cool because it kind of allowed for, as you move the ink across the top, part of it would not stick to the page. It kind of worked its way off and kind of left a graphic behind. And so I went with this Constellation version of it, which, trying to see if you can even see, with the right light you can see a little bit of that image. It's a Virgo image right there. So this one, once you put the ink on, lets you see that. But the problem with this one is the size. I mean, a card of this nature, it's not like a business card size. It's harder to find a place to store them. I ended up having to go with they had these little notebooks that were used for fingernail polish or that type of thing. So I ended up getting one of these, which fit the cards good, but they're really hard to slide the cards in and out of. But this is what I started building out. So you can see I've got quite a few of swatches of some of the inks that I have, and they were all within this format. But getting them in and out was a pain. They were big. I really wanted something that was more business card sized. So as much as I like how cool these things are with the logos and the image or the constellations on them, I just didn't like the size. So I ended up abandoning that one and going with these. How do I even want to pronounce this? Waringo? That's how I say it in my mind, is Waringo. And then I could just cut a couple dots there for some information. It looks like I've already inked myself. And I ended up going with these cards because they are business card size, and I can fit them into the binders that I had gotten myself, which is this binder here. And I prefer this a lot more. You can see how many more I can get on a page. Get that in the frame. And I can flip through my collection. And it's a lot easier to get the cards in and out of these particular ones as opposed to the old version that I used to use. So that's what I settled on. I've got my entire ink collection is in here, so I can kind of at a glance see if there's a special type of ink that I want to be using. So I've got plenty of room to grow on this one. This particular notebook has a slotted system to it where I can just kind of slot in new inserts, so I can buy another one of these and just slot it right into the notebook and expand as I need to. So that's what I ended up going to for my swatches, and I'm happy with that. This is what I'll be sticking with for swatching my inks. Now, some would say I'm not, but I see myself, as I look at other collectors, and I'd say I'm kind of in the mid to low level dabbler of the ink portion of this hobby. Yes, I have more than I will ever use in my lifetime, but still it's a small collection in comparison to some others I've seen in the Reddit feed. Either way, my ink breadth would be considered pretty narrow by some standards, but I do own and have my opinions on what I have purchased. In other words, my brand knowledge is not huge. I have a limited number of brands that I play with. So I'll just kind of cover some of those. First, as I first got into the hobby, it was for journaling. That was kind of my purpose. So when you're considering journaling, you have to have a permanent type of ink, an archival ink. So what I went with is, if you read the forums, carbon ink is like the one that pretty much everyone talks about for archival black ink purposes as I was journaling. So I picked up this carbon ink. But not too long ago, Diamine came out with what they call their Forever inks, and I picked up this Forever version of the Diamine permanent ink, and I like it a lot better. I'll be honest, I have now moved to this Raven Forever ink as opposed to the carbon ink. The carbon ink, I don't know how to explain it. It seems more scratchy to me. My nib feels scratchier when I'm using carbon ink, and when I went to this, it just kind of came out so much smoother. And I water tested it, and it worked really well. So this is now my go-to for journaling for black archival ink, is my Forever ink, and I have retired the carbon ink at this point. Now, my favorite brand is Diamine. That's probably followed by the Pilot Irishizuku ink, but another one I really like is the Sailor Shikiori. These right here come in, and as you can hear, beautiful in the clack department. So I love displaying these, and I use some of these. My daughter's totally hooked on this particular version of the ink. for her journals. So these are probably my 3 favorite brands of inks. But at this point, it's probably time to go ahead and show you the collection so you can kind of see what I've dabbled in over time. So let's take a look. When my son moved out, my last boy, we took his bedroom and converted it into a guest bedroom. So it's kind of a little more of a Asian cherry blossom kind of theme that we have going on. But my wife let me take over some of the bookshelf for my inks because they just kind of worked well. So these are all my Japanese inks for the most part. I've got quite a few of the Shikiori, as you can see, some of the Irishizuku, and I even have a Waringill mixed in with there. But this is my kind of glass section of the collection. I usually keep my swatch thing here, and then this is the other section of my ink collection, which is most of my diamines. I have experimented with others. You know, I've got a Ferris wheel press I messed with, some of the alchemies that I just think are cool looking, so that's why I had to own those. This is 2 layers deep of the diamine inks, and then I also bought last year's 25 Days of Christmas Advent ink calendar. So that's what all these are here in the back, are the Advent inks. So I mean, it's not a huge collection. I mean, it's you know, most people would look at that and go, "Are you crazy?" But I think it looks really nice in the display. This, my daughter's painted some cherry blossoms on the wall over here. But this is kind of where I do my videoing and journaling, is this room now. So that is my ink collection. I've got, like I said, I've tried quite a few brands. Not an insane volume of them, but I've got a good enough collection now that I doubt I'll be picking up many of them more over time. I'm pretty content with what I've got here. So I'll just gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. Hopefully you learn a little bit about the inks and what I've got collected. I'm sure there's more than a few people out there with many, many more than I have. But the next video is actually going to be covering my wife's journaling habits. She was a scrapbooker, so her journals sure look a lot prettier than mine. So I'm going to kind of do a side-by-side comparison of my journaling method to my wife's.